Talmor, Shishin Magachi. Talmor is my home. My family have worked the land for generations. My gran says the island does not belong to us, but we belong to the island. And we must be ready, for a great evil is coming, and death follows with it.
Listen and subscribe to the latest season of Undertow, The Harrowing, a Storyglass production presented by Realm, available wherever you get your podcasts.
Hi, I'm Alexis Ohanian. You may know me as one of the co-founders of Reddit, but more recently, a large part of my identity is being a father to my wonderful daughters. In my podcast, Business Dad, I hope to open the conversation about working parents a bit. You'll get to hear from a wide range of business dads, from Rainn Wilson and Guy Raz to Todd Carmichael and Shane Battier, to find out how they balance being a dad with a successful career. Business Dad is available now, so be sure to listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first commentary episode for Uncanny Valley. I am Chris Burnside, lead writer of the show, and we have a lot of wonderful people joining us, starting with...
I'm Megan Burnside. I'm also one of the writers.
I'm Luna Madison. I play Audrey.
I'm Emily Kallenberg, and I play Izzy.
I'm Katharine Seaton. I'm the composer and sound designer.
And I'm Lucy Waskiewicz. I'm also one of the writers.
Whew. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. That's great to have you here. We are going to talk through a lot of the making of the first episode of Uncanny Valley and kind of like some of the underpinning of what made the show in the first place. The way this is going to work is this first episode, if you're hearing it, you may be hearing it on our feed because this is going out to everyone on the Uncanny Valley feed, but we are also doing more commentary episodes for the rest of the season 1 of Uncanny Valley, and those will be available on our Patreon as Patreon exclusives to our supporters there at patreon.com/Hidden People Podcast.
Perfect. So, Chris, I know that Uncanny Valley in particular was one of your ideas that you came to the group with. Where did that idea come from for Uncanny Valley?
Like, I don't know, a few years ago, I saw this tweet and it said something like, if the Uncanny Valley is a thing, then that means at some point humans had to learn how to fear things that pretended to be human. And I was like, that's a really creepy thought. So that just kind of stuck in my brain. And while we were working on other shows, this idea popped in there of something that pretended to be human that would be very unsettling. The experience of encountering it would be very unsettling because it wasn't human, but pretending to be. And that coincided with the potential title of Uncanny Valley. And sometimes like a title will strike me and with an idea and I'm like, oh, that all fits together. That's like a whole package. And that's kind of what this one was. Mm-hmm. So from there, I layered in a few elements and then I recruited the writing team. And then I think I just showed up to the first meeting and said, like, here are the story elements I know, which weren't that many, but it was some of the basics of like the basic characters. So we had really, really complex character names. We started with protagonist, dead best friend, stalker, and pilot, right? Dolly was the pilot. Oh, by the way, we are going to spoil things for the whole season. So if you haven't listened to the whole season yet, why are you listening to this? Go listen to the season, then come back because we will spoil things for season 1. So I think we had those names and I had like a very general outline of what was going to happen like over the whole season. And that was it. So that was kind of like where that idea came from and what I showed up with. But everything else, like we do at Dayton Writers Movement, was very collaborative. So there was a lot of input from all the other people involved.
Well, and speaking of, so the way we break the stories is through a writing team. So Chris said he pitched the idea to the team, and then we kind of we formed a team really quickly. And one of the new writers that we have on the team this year is Lucy. Do you want to explain how we recruited Lucy?
Yeah, Lucy was a student of mine. I'm a professor of writing, and Lucy was a student of mine and wrote probably the strongest story I've ever read from a student in a class, like ever. And I was like, hey, would you want to work on something? Because you're like really good. That's the whole story. Is that accurate, Lucy?
I think you flatter me, but you, I think pitched me, was it my sophomore year, Uncanny Valley?
So,
And I remember being so excited because Polar Express is one of my favorite movies. And I like it particularly because it is so off-putting and the animation is so almost like people, but it's not. So to be able to flesh out our own kind of story dealing with the strangeness and ominousness of an Uncanny Valley concept was so exciting. So yeah, I was immediately on board. It was very exciting for little sophomore me.
I love that example has both Uncanny Valley and cold, right?
it's true.
Perfect. So we created the writing team, and then what we do is we kind of break this story.
And that was the three of us, Megan, myself, and Lucy, plus Carrie Zahn, who's worked with us on most of our shows.
So really quickly, before we hop in more to the story, let's talk about Dayton Writers Movement, because you may have heard of us or you may not have. I feel like with Uncanny Valley, a lot of our listeners came in new to Dayton Writers Movement. Do you want to give like a really quick insight into who we are?
Yeah, I mean, we started in 2016 with a little show called Unwritten, and it was just a bunch of local writers wanting to make something. And eventually, like as we were working on it, Megan realized that this is better than something that should just sit on your hard drives. Like we should do something with this. And then we kind of found audio drama, which we didn't know was a thing because we're Americans. So Katie's like, audio drama's been around forever. What is wrong with you? But we found that and we were like, well, we can actually make that. Like we didn't have the budget to make a full web series of this show. Like that would just be so expensive. But we could make a very bare bones audio drama, which is what we did. And we learned a lot from that process and had a good time doing it. And then we rolled that into making The Hidden People, which was our longest running and biggest show. And then we've made other shows since then too. But at the core, we are still just a local group of artists who want to basically boost the voices of these writers and directors and performers and other people like post people, editors and sound designers, composers, etc., who might not have that reach. And especially when we started, like none of us that were involved had any reach beyond local stuff. Our performers were all local theater people or did like some indie film. And so there wasn't a huge amount of reach involved. And we were able to have those people reach much larger audiences. And that was really where it started. And we still, in many ways, kind of work at that sort of grassroots way. Like Uncanny Valley was recorded in our basement. Like Katie makes it sound so professional. We recorded the show in our basement. And we don't have the backing of major studios or anything like that. It's just us.
Yeah, that's why everyone who listens to the show means the world to us. So thank you for listening. For everyone who supports us on Patreon, it's amazing. Every bit helps us to keep producing and creating these shows. And thank you to our performers also. So do we want to talk about why Alaska?
Yeah, I mean, we can. The Alaska thing is simple. I wanted an environment that was really isolated. I wanted this to be this really isolated story because I feel like a thing that pretended to be a person but wasn't like super good at it was not so good at it that it didn't make you feel awkward. Couldn't be just in a really populated area. Like that probably wouldn't work. They'd be like the creepy neighbor, maybe. The person down the street that was like, don't go to that house. But like, so that's why, and I don't know why I picked Alaska. It was just,
we talked about a lot of things too
isolated.
Before we finalized, like completely firmed up Alaska. I knew we were talking about, what about Montana, Wyoming, other parts of the United States that were more isolated. But yeah, Alaska just felt even further out. Yeah. And then we did a whole bunch of research on Alaska. We watched every documentary we could think of as we prepped for Alaska, which is good because there's a lot of documentaries out there on Netflix, Hulu, all of the apps. And Alaska felt like the right place because yes, there are populous parts of Alaska, but there's also parts of Alaska that are very remote, very difficult to get into. very difficult to leave. If you have an issue in Alaska in one of the remote parts, you kind of have to figure it out yourself, or have one of your nearby neighbors who live a ways away help you. And so it's very much you got to fix it yourself. You got to handle it, and it's frontier life essentially, but in today's time. So it was a very interesting piece. I feel like Alaska definitely played a role in this show, whereas sometimes the setting is just the setting, but Alaska was definitely a crucial role to the show.
Yeah. Katie, how did that play in for you? Like, because you brought we brought the words in the script, but you brought the like feel of Alaska into the sound.
Yeah.
I feel like the setting, even if it's not intentionally relevant to the story when you conceive it, it becomes relevant to the story once you're in it. But you're correct in that this particular setting has a very strong character of its own, a very strong mood and atmosphere. And there's a lot more scope for reflecting the inner and the outer, because obviously our protagonist is a very isolated person, but with a lot going on inside that we might not necessarily hear in what she's saying all the time. And some of that can be portrayed in the sort of the energy in the wind and the wildlife, but also in music, and if music is able to depict twinkling cold energy as well. So luckily for me, because circling back to the lack of budget in our productions, I wasn't able to go field recording in Alaska from London. Luckily, there are a lot of really great samples, actually, of the wilderness up there. I think it seems to be a place that field recorders like to go. So I was able to go like a hunter-gatherer and find everything I could that's out there that's been recorded by people, and think about what characteristics I wanted to immerse our protagonists in right from the start. And I wanted to create layers. We have a kind of background layer of the wind churning, and we have all the detail of what the trees are doing right next to your ears. And I tried to do quite a lot of arranging it so that we felt like there was always a sense of motion in the sound. And the cabin itself has a very distinct quality as well, with the thin wooden wall not really providing the insulation in any sense that Audrey has been hoping for as she's running away. So yeah, I think it is a setting with a lot of potential to generate a strong sense of there's something here that we're not seeing.
That's very cool.
I love that. And then how did that also impact like your music choices? Because definitely this has it has the uncanny feel, and it has kind of this like wildernessy feel. So what were your thoughts behind the music?
I'll focus just on the first episode because the music goes places, and there's quite a lot of material by the time we get to episode 9 as required by the story and by the characters in it. But in the first episode, the music is mostly focused on nature, I suppose, and on this idea that Audrey is this passionate introvert who is still running. You know, that hesitant delivery lunatic. I always got the sense that she was still like a sort of a twitchy animal who was calculating multiple ways to respond to any threat that might arrive her way. But there's also, you also get a glimpse of that inner energy that you get in sort of deep introverts, where all that joy and passion underneath is the reason that they are quiet, is because they have enough energy already. And we see that when she goes out to look at the stars. And I wanted to bring in the feel of the environment again. So the very first cue I wrote in the musical material, underscoring the drama rather than the theme itself, came in from the note of the snow machine, which was played by some muted cellos, picking up that note. And then we had the rest of a string orchestra all muted and on harmonics, doing these kind of little, just tiny little phrases overlapping to sort of get a sense of the snow coming down, or the things, the ice on the trees, or whatever it is that we think we're seeing when we hear that. I really wanted the audience to be able to get a picture of where they were, whatever it looked like for them. And so the music was serving that goal as well as the sound design at that moment. Later on, we have the first appearance of the creature. And for that, I suppose Chris had sent me a playlist ages before we started post-production, which mostly was music which was influenced by dark Scandinavian folk tradition, which is great for me because the way I write, I tend to lean into melody and strong grooves, and like I really like complex texture, so I like to build layers into a bigger sort of tapestry. And that kind of music almost does the opposite. It's real bare, sparse, and it's just all about the mood. You can have one chord for minutes on end. And so it gave me another dimension if I kept returning to the playlist and listening and trying to pull in those dark moods, because then my natural voice would sort of feed into that and play off it. And so the creature music was more about that dark, ancient, primitive thing, which is somehow part and parcel of this very wild landscape. And so we hear that obviously when Roderick meets his demise, and later on when Audrey comes close to the same, and that was bringing in all sorts of fun things like male whispered vocals and things like that, which was a good time for me.
Well, let's talk about the characters. So you kind of, Katie, hinted at a lot of what Audrey is about. Luna, when you jumped into Audrey, what was your thought process to kind of bring her character to life, and what did you think were like her key defining pieces?
Yeah, so looking at the character, she felt had the same like disposition as Elaine, but like with a completely different personality. Because the first when I auditioned, I was like, oh, this is Elaine trying to parent. When I first auditioned, and that was like the note I gave myself. And then digging more into her, she's a lot more aware of everything and actually like has this caring of the world around her and an interest in it. She was probably the easiest character I've ever had to like break down and like figure out how she works and go through and kind of conceptualize what makes her tick and where her fears are and where her cares are. And it's, yeah.
And for listeners who don't know, Elaine was the character in Unwritten who Luna also played. So yeah, that's who you're referring to. And when we wrote the character, I definitely saw similarities with like the introversion and that sort of thing. But also, obviously, as you pointed out, some key differences too, because Audrey's not a sociopath, so there's that.
No. No, not at all. She's very sweet. Her awkwardness comes from like this deep need to like actually want to connect and like want people to like her. And it was really fun trying to portray that need for connection in the weirdest way possible.
I had a question actually, because ages ago I watched you record a video where you were talking about being Elaine. And you said that you'd feel a certain amount of nervousness coming into rehearsal, and you tried to channel that into your performance as Elaine. I was wondering if you were able to access that energy at this point, or whether you're too familiar with everything at this point to be able to do that.
It wasn't a nervousness, and I think that really plays more into who Audrey is a more sense of like, because Audrey isn't necessarily a nervous person. And so having that like more groundedness, I think really helped with the character. Because if I was nervous and I would like get really up there and like be really airy and just be off the wall being like, oh my God, did you know this? And that's not who Audrey is. Audrey is like much more grounded. And so I think I didn't have that nervous energy, but I had a different thing going into it, being comfortable with everyone and how the system works and being more certain about who I'm playing and how I play and all that good stuff.
Yeah,
so
she knows who she is, doesn't she? And she's comfortable.
Yeah. So it's really nice to evolve with characters.
Yeah, I mean, that character is interesting because she is like, you do feel like she is more confident, but she's aware that she is socially awkward. And so that interplay of confidence and socially awkward, I mean, we really see that more in episode 2, but I love what you bring to Audrey, and then later on adding in that really intense anxiety from the trauma that you've gone through. And so I think Audrey has a lot to play with. And what I love too is your interaction with Izzy. And so Emily, if you want to kind of do the same, like if you can share with us, like where did you take Izzy and the direction that she goes throughout the season?
So Izzy was challenging to take on because we were looking for the ability to show contrast with Audrey, right? I mean, Izzy is perpetually 17, but she still is with Audrey all the time. So while she can't grow as far as like maturity and character that way, she does grow in that she has experiences still. And so she's still experiencing things while Audrey's experiencing them. And there is a huge sense of helplessness from Izzy. She can't do anything to help Audrey, but she wants to because Audrey's her best friend. So we see a lot of that, and trying to capture youth while being an old lady like I am, that was definitely different. It's funny because this is the second time I played a dead person that lives in Luna's head. Yeah, also did that in Unwritten. So if we could stop, killing me off tragically, that would be great. I mean, Izzy is such a fun character to play. I mean, her attitude and her joy in the simple things, I think really helps kind of ground Audrey, especially because Audrey is so creative. I think that pointing out that artistry side of who Audrey is really also helps kind of remind you who Izzy is, because Izzy was all about fun, all about adventure. And then she dragged Audrey with her everywhere she went. And Audrey was up for it, but then when Audrey lost Izzy physically, what did that look like for Audrey and who she was becoming? And what does it look like that she didn't actually lose Izzy, because Izzy's still there. So Izzy was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed playing Izzy and having that challenge of definitely changing characters. And man, I love it when Izzy gets to be sassy. So more of that, the better.
It was wonderful. Like, I know that we're an audio medium, but like watching you play Izzy was so fun as well. Just the way that you like physically embodied her. It was so fun.
It is. I do feel like I need to get a straitjacket when I record, because I knock things all the time because I can't help but move my hands always.
Well, especially with Izzy, Emily, because like when you played Sam in The Hidden People, you could sit there and like read it, with your iPad or with your binder. But with Izzy, you're like, no, I need to stand. And like you were constantly moving and trying to keep that energy level high as you were performing.
Yeah. Izzy moves. She's a wiggler, like, which is funny because she doesn't have a body. So you would think, like,
that's interesting, because when we went, we've been going back and doing some slight remixing the first 5 episodes, and at that point, I actually put Izzy permanently on a binaural panner so that she could float around, because she just, in my head, the fact that she was just like 5 degrees to the right of Audrey all the time didn't feel right for the character, and it worked so much better once she was able to be a bit more ghostly and sort of flit around in a slightly capricious way.
Yeah, if you've come to the show early enough that we haven't replaced the first 5 episodes, you may have noticed a significant difference between the first 5 and the remaining 4 episodes on how Izzy is constantly just moving around, which I agree is very much in keeping with that character.
Totally.
Lucy, what was your perspective on writing these 2 characters because you were part of the like crafting of their personalities while we were talking about them? What was your approach to that?
Yeah, I did. I was going to mention I loved writing Izzy. I felt like the show itself balances a lot of humor with a lot of really darker themes and storylines. And writing Izzy was such a great way to kind of bring that humor. But then I think in my 3rd episode, she also is like a very serious character at points. When Audrey has her little breakdown after her interaction with Roxanne, it's Izzy who's able to sort of calm her down and let her know that this isn't that big of a deal. So writing Izzy was super interesting because of how she brings that sort of balance that reflects sort of the balance that's struck throughout the entire show. I don't know how exactly I approached their dynamic. It was just, I felt like they really played off each other super well. Yeah, I don't know. Having one to sort of balance out the other and making sure to keep their personalities, to just like have a way to express what Audrey's feeling that we can't, because obviously it's an audio format, we can't get like her inner monologue. So being able to use sort of Izzy to that capacity to express what might not translate over audio was really interesting. It's something that I've never done before. And I felt like personally their dynamic was one of my favorite parts of writing the show. And then right now listening to it, I think it's really excellent.
I like the secret nature of the interactions as well. Like you've got the Audrey who talks to the living people, and then you've got the other Audrey that nobody knows about. I find that a fun dynamic too.
So part of Izzy, like from the beginning, Izzy, or dead best friend, as we started with, DBF, as she was written in all of like the treatments and whatnot, she was DBF the whole time, had to exist because something we learned very early on by doing these audio shows is that it's really difficult to have a character be alone in a scene unless you have a full narration of their thoughts running all the time. And we've used various forms of narration in earlier shows, but in all of our recent shows, we've just gone to a completely no narration format. And also trying to write it in a screenwriting style tradition where you don't just have the dialogue narrate, where people just say things like, "Oh, I can't believe you just punched him. Oh no," like, basically narrating while not really narrating. So we've tried to move away from all of that and have just no narration and really express everything through the ways in which characters speak and the things that are happening. But when you do that, you can't really have a character by themselves. Mm-hmm. So we had to have someone who would be there all the time, like a sidekick in some way. And that's where Dead Best Friend came from, was the need to have that. And then what happens is that reciprocally informs the protagonist. So then we learn a lot more about the protagonist by thinking about how they would interact with that second person. And so then we get to learn a lot more. Like we learned a lot more about Audrey, I think, by figuring out the relationship with Izzy and in the relationship with other characters too, of course. But like one of the things that I think is really interesting about Audrey is I don't think, at least this is not how I wrote Izzy or Audrey, I don't think she began life, or her natural state is, as Luna said, a state of nervousness, a state of fear, a state of everything bad happens to me all the time. Like she says at one point at the end, being unlucky is her superpower. But I don't think she's that person by nature. I think that all of those things are learned. Her fear of losing everyone around her is learned. Her fear of people coming after her or wanting to hurt her, that jitteriness that she has in the first episode, like Cody taught her to be afraid in that way. I don't think she ever was before. And we even have hints of how she tries to like ignore creepy guys on the subway and those sorts of things in other episodes, especially during the flashbacks, where she wasn't that person. She wasn't jittery. She wasn't afraid of every person, trying to hurt her. It was him that taught her that. So much of Audrey's character is built from all of those interactions and experiences she has with others. And I think Izzy also informs a lot of that too, because she has such a strong connection with Izzy to the point where probably way too codependent. Mm-hmm. And that was a really fun way to learn about that character by creating the other characters around her and then letting them inform us about who she really is.
Uncanny Valley will return in a moment.
As a podcast network, our focus is bringing you shows you love to listen to. But we also sell merch related to those shows. And partnering with Shopify has made that both possible and simple for us to do. Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. Whether you're selling scented soap or offering outdoor adventures, Shopify helps you sell everywhere because they've got you covered, from their all-in-one e-commerce platform to their in-person POS system. What's so fantastic about Shopify is how, no matter how big you want to grow, they provide everything you need to get control of your business so you can take it to the next level. Businesses that grow with Shopify. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/realm. That's all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/realm now to grow your business, no matter what stage you're in. Shopify.com/realm.
On a remote island in frigid Lake Superior, a fabricated creature birthed from the mind of a disturbed genius stalks the very people who created it. Ancestor, by #1 New York Times bestselling author Scott Sigler, is a classic tale of science gone horribly wrong. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
And now, back to Uncanny Valley.
Let's step away from the two main characters and talk about the very first scene of Uncanny Valley. So one thing that we've learned across our different shows is how important, of course, the first episode is to getting people excited about the show. And I feel like, Chris, you did an amazing job of really hitting the vibe of the show in the very first scene. One of the ways, of course, is the writing, and two is the performers. We brought in two great performers to be, I think, who was it? Tom and Sandy. So Stephen Kallenberg and Megan Rupert. Megan plays one of the leads on Think Fast, and Stephen has played one of the leads on many of our shows, but specifically Hidden People. He plays one of the leads. But these two performers really ran with your script. But talk us through the intention of the very first scene of Uncanny Valley.
Well, yeah, so we learned one of the Dayton Writers Movement things that we've been learning slowly over time is that we should probably get to the point faster. Hidden People takes 11 episodes to get to the giant genre twist that's oh, that's what this show's really about for the next 55 episodes. But you have to sit through 5 hours to get there. So if you're oh, I tried to listen to the Hidden People and I don't understand it at all. What is going on? This doesn't sound like something that the description talks about. Yeah, that's why. So we wanted to get to the point faster. And then, so we started trying to do that more. And then Think Fast, we got to the point kind of sooner than that. But with this one, it was no, let's just get to the vibe in the literal first scene. Mm-hmm. We want the creature to show up in the first scene. We want horror and violence in the very first scene. And this sense of isolation, all of the things, right? And so that's where we came up with the idea of a cold open, which we have not really ever done before that. Just having a complete cold open on these essentially red shirt characters.
What do you mean by cold open?
Who are going to be slaughtered. Oh, a cold open is just jumping right into something right in the middle of it without a setup that feels like the start of something. There are no introductions to these characters. They just are in this car arguing with each other. They just are there and we're just there with them all of a sudden. Which, by the way, the feel of the cold open is amplified by this really cool thing that Katie did by opening us on what she called an establishing shot with the audio, where we just kind of we're in the foresty area of Alaska, just getting all of that before we zoom in on the car, which really enhances the feel of that cold open. But yeah, that's what we were really going for, was just throwing everyone right into it, into a situation that had some emotional tension and even a bit of awkwardness, which is why they were arguing. And then obviously transitioning us into the appearance of the monster and the shape-shifting nature of it and all of the horror of that as well. So that's kind of what we were going for with that opening scene.
And I can't tell you how many people, and I don't know if you all agree on the call, but so many people are that scene is too real for me, between the argument between Tom and Sandy.
Yep.
It's a very good argument.
100%. It was that's a real life thing. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Little rude.
I think there was a script comment that said, "Did you record one of my parents' arguments?" or something like that.
That was from Carrie, right? Yes. Yeah. And I think Emily and Steven, I know you both said that. I know I looked at Chris, I'm why did you write this? I think the relatability of Tom and Sandy arguing like that really brings you into the story so that you can then get ripped apart, really and figuratively.
Nice.
It was so creepy.
It was creepy. And we will have a future episode, commentary episode on this, but the monster conception from the performance standpoint was with Stephen. And that's one of the reasons why we chose Stephen Kallenberg to play Tom, because he would be one of the first appearances he is the first appearance of the monster, and how the monster would act in quote unquote human form, right? So the uncanny version of human form. And so this was him playing around with it. And I know, Emily, I know that you got to experience him practicing.
Yes, it was terrifying. Actually, Steve and I sat down together and talked about monsters for a long time. And we watched a lot of different like horror movies and specifically like clips of creepy monsters. And I'm sure eventually like we'll grab Steven on here and I'll let him kind of talk about where that inspiration came from. But I know that listening to Steve practice different monster voices is not my favorite activity, especially because we have children. So he waits until it's dark and it's creepy and he does it in the basement and not an enjoyable experience. But it is fun to hear how all the different takes that he had before he submitted his thoughts to Chris and Megan. And so, Stephen is definitely a creative person, and the amount of confidence that he has to just go for it every single time, because he's played several different creepy things throughout all of your shows, and it's awesome to hear him grow in that way, and to hear all the varieties of ways that he can take something and make it terrifying.
Yeah. Well, and Katie, I know that you just kind of ran with what he did too. Like you kind of played around with it. And I know it also evolves as the show goes on. But what was your approach to taking what Stephen created and then layering on the like physicality of the monster?
Yeah, I didn't need to do all that much, honestly. When I got the dialogue edits from our dialogue editor, McKinney, his name is, it would be like the line and then those little clicks and then the next line and the little clicks. So all I did with that was I took the clicks and I made them sound like they were interrupting the attempt to speak like a human. The idea being that it was an effort for this monster to hold the human form or to get the words out. And it seemed to flow a lot better once I'd done that, which I think was Stephen's intention in the first place. So that was good that we were all of one mind. I feel like what you can do in a computer to manipulate vocals has its limits. You can vocode and you can beef up or sort of add saturation, that sort of thing. But it always ends up sounding a little bit cliched, tropey monster voice, which we've heard before, and it doesn't sound real. Obviously, we're looking for that sense of the uncanny. So we don't want it to sound like unreal horror movie monster voice. We want it to sound like nearly real, but not quite right. So what I actually did was, rather than trying to beef up the voice, I did the opposite. I tried to hollow it out just a little bit. For those of you in audio people, EQ or equalization is like a frequency sensitive volume knob, right? So you can just choose which bits of the spectrum of what we can hear you boost or suppress. So I used EQ to take out the sort of the warmer bits of the voice, or the bits that's sort of often where the fundamental frequency of the human voice sits. I kind of cut those a little bit so that it sounded a little bit more kind of detached from the body of the human almost. And the other thing I did, which I've never done before but worked really well, was I used de-reverb to excess. De-reverb is a plugin which is used for correction. It has varying success, and if you overdo it, it sort of has this weird sort of hollowed out sound that it gives you, where it suddenly doesn't sound right or quite human anymore. So normally you get there and then you're like, okay, that's too much. I'll have to sort of reduce the amount that I'm doing. I thought, what if I got the de-reverb and just took everything that it could give me to take stuff out of the voice, so it sounds completely stripped away from its environment and weirdly altered. And that worked. So I did that. And so what you're hearing when you hear the creature in its human form is basically the voice of the actor plus the clicks that Stephen devised. And then the voice made sort of less grounded in the body and less real, but only subtly so. That's all it is. Like, there was no sort of vocoding or any fancy stuff like that.
That's
awesome.
so cool.
I'm just obsessed listening to you talk. It's so wonderful to see how you do things.
Yeah, I mean, the lovely thing about this sort of audio production and music production is, like, you think about the meaning behind it and the story you're telling and how you're telling the story with the sounds that you choose and the choices that you make. And that's why I love to do it, because so much in audio drama rides on the choices you make about how you're going to present the story in terms of what the audience hears. So much depends on that in terms of what the audience is going to end up visualizing or experiencing.
Well,
We're so lucky you love to do it.
Yeah.
Right? Like, the company is called Dayton Writers Movement, and you might think that that's just like talking about the writers, but everyone that we work with, especially the people that we keep working with, are all phenomenal storytellers. And so it's not just our writers, it's our performers who are really great storytellers. Like, they're not just showing up and reading the line. They're thinking about, how is this working to build a story? What is the narrative impact of all of the choices? And that's the most fun part about working with Katie, is that Katie's always thinking about the narrative impact of every musical and sound choice and like telling the story with that. So everyone is working toward telling the story, not just, I'm just going to show up and do my little part and that's it. And that's, I mean, for me, like, it's all about the narrative. And so I love having those conversations and hearing all of the little decisions that you might not realize are actually all part of these storytelling decisions.
So I want to highlight a few additional people that were a part of this episode. Katie mentioned McKinney Botts. He does our first pass of all of our edits. He cleans up our recording tracks and makes them sound like they're not coming from our basement. He does a fantastic job. We really appreciate all of the work that he does. He's definitely a master at that. And then we did have a couple other performers that really brought some life to the episode. First, we have Alan Limke, who played Everett, the realtor. We loved his voice immediately. He just had this folksy type warmth to his voice, and it was, I think, very comforting to Audrey, right? As Audrey was moving in.
It was very comforting. You killed them, you monsters. It was so sad.
That's why we need characters. We need characters to kill. So, and then we had Katie Williams, who played Nora. Again, another person. I feel like Audrey, we surround Audrey with people who are trying to take care of Audrey, right? And so Nora is the manager, but she's also kind of like the mentor / mother figure to Audrey. And even though she's over the phone, she still has that warmth and connection with Audrey that I love. And Katie did a great job with that. We also have a very brief line of Audrey's neighbor, who's not really the neighbor anymore, played by Tommy Balaj, and that is Marcus.
It's funny, I've got written down here, what is it about Audrey that makes everyone want to look after her?
Right? Yeah, I think
that is a good question.
Yeah.
You don't know how to make coffee, do you? It's fine. We'll do it. You're okay.
I keep wanting to go into Starbucks and get, what is it, a grande vanilla almond milk latte, just to see what it tastes like.
Delicious.
But I'm slightly too self-conscious to ask for something so specific. It's probably a British thing.
No, I just get really awkward when you're like, I want something very specific, but unfortunately, I don't want to take up your time.
Next time you're in the States, Katie, I'm ordering you a coffee. I have no problem being specific. So, like, I'll get one for you.
I think that Audrey orders it in the correct order, too.
Of course she
I'm
does.
pretty sure that's the like actual order that Starbucks wants you to go in.
To follow that. Yeah.
So I think that she does that correctly, if I remember.
Yeah, I'm sure she saw a TikTok where some Starbucks employee was like complaining about something and she was like, oh, I must internalize this now.
That's why I think people want to take care of Audrey, because she cares about taking care of people.
She does.
And in general, when you know somebody who is kind and nice and they care about everything and everyone, you want to be like that person. You want to care about them too. And I think that's why Audrey attracts such genuine people.
Yeah.
My 2 cents out there.
I think she has an earnestness about her that makes people be like, oh, you're real, and this isn't like some facade you're putting on for being like a little bit ungrounded and out there. You're just truly like this, and people really want to take care of those types of people who are earnest and a little out of the water.
That kind of guileless quality is very appealing, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, this show has it's pretty split. There are the characters who are very genuinely themselves. Hard on your sleeve. I don't pretend to be somebody I'm not. Yeah, then you have the things that are the villains who are all about wearing masks all the time, right? So obviously the creature is wearing masks clearly all the time, but you have Cody who basically is wearing a mask all the time, and you have Doyle also who is very much like wearing a mask. So there is a big contrast between all of the heroes, if you will, are all pretty upfront about who they are. Audrey and Izzy are pretty much who they are. Dahlia is very unabashedly Dahlia. So it is interesting to see that dichotomy there.
That's interesting because it kind of maps to the theme of the show, doesn't it? About what is real and what is not. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes. So that is the defining statement that Cody and Doyle are not human.
Agreed.
Now decided it.
I can get behind that.
Emily, Izzy died in like the early 2000s, right?
Mm-hmm.
Did you at all dig into your early 2000s high school career?
Izzy is as opposite of a person as I am in general. However, I know Izzy in real life. Like, I knew who Izzy was. Like, I had an Izzy. She didn't die. She's still out there. But like somebody who was just super confident in who they were and like pushed their friends to be the best that they could be. So I dug more into that than necessarily like the era of who Izzy is. But I do think that a lot of Izzy's tone goes back to that time frame, which it goes back to that, like her being stuck. Even though she has the experience, like she's experiencing life through Audrey, Izzy is stuck being 17 and she can't change that mindset and that growth. And so that's a little bit where that Valley, just a little Valley girl comes in with Izzy in her tone, for sure.
Yeah, I love those characters that are like stuck somewhere, but also have to keep moving.
Yeah.
And it's really like Claudia and from Interview and that type of character. Where it's just like really interesting. And I love seeing like where do you pull from before and where do you put in the now?
I think so. I think the timeline is that Izzy and Audrey are both born around like 93-ish. And that Izzy then died in like 2010. Somewhere around there. But we did a lot of like looking at things from those time periods because we needed to have like references, and this is when she was alive in a flashback, but when she's talking about like what she could do with all the money that she could get. We're like, well, what was the thing that you might be into? And you might think that short list of things was just something we came up with. No, that was like days of looking on the internet, asking Carrie and Lucy, who are younger than I am, like, what was a thing back then? And so then they were kind of like, oh, what about this? I don't know who came up with silly bands.
What is a silly band? No, let's not go there.
Oh no, we should though. I don't remember who suggested that, but that was so on the nose for that time period. I think everyone had like, geez, you had the rare ones, you had the regular ones, you had like bags of them and you traded them. So I was very happy with that decision.
So they go on your arm, right?
They like look like little animals or objects or whatever. There were words, but they were like little bracelets. Yeah.
Like rubber bands.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
This has been educational. Thank you.
And so like this is why you collaborate, because I was never a teenage girl in 2010. I haven't ever been that. So in order to accurately depict that, like I still don't really know what those things are. I know now more than I did just 5 minutes ago. But I can write that into the script because, you know, we collaborate with people who know those things. So that's why you like talk to people who've been through these things and get those experiences.
Yeah, we definitely used old references too, so that Izzy would feel time appropriate. And yeah, so it was kind of fun and interesting. But yeah, we definitely used Lucy and Carrie a lot for that. So is this the thing? Okay, well, let's, if we don't have any more questions, let's go ahead and do what your favorite thing from episode 1 was. And I can start. Mine is very easy. When Izzy is making fun of Rhett hitting on Audrey, and she's making the vomiting sounds. Vomiting sounds just like cracked me up. They were just so funny.
But not quite real enough to like trigger.
Not gross, just hilarious. Yeah. You can go now.
Okay, I'll go. My favorite thing of episode 1 and the entire series is the star music.
Yes.
When the music that comes in when she walks out to look at the stars, and it starts before that, like you could hear the build up to it, but then it really hits right when she walks out and looks up at the stars. I have listened to that an absurd number of times. I can hear every single bit of it in my head right now because I've listened to it so many times. It is my favorite piece of music that Katie has written for us. And I just think it's glorious because it's just beautiful on its own. But I don't know that I've ever heard anything that captures the wonder of those kinds of experiences. And we like to go out to the wilderness to vacation. And when you look up at the stars in the middle of nowhere, nothing quite looks like that. And it's such an experience. And that music just captured that sense of wonder in a way that I don't think I've ever heard anything else do. And so that's not only my favorite thing from the first episode, it is my literal favorite thing from the entire series.
Okay, so we're going to bump to Luna.
Same. The stargazing scene just captured me, and it captured that awe and wonder. And I was like listening to it over and over. And I'm like, this is what it feels like when you're outside and like the northern lights and the stars and being surrounded like that. And I was just so excited when that came up. And it was like almost like a Ghibli film vibes going on with that, being able to capture like not the reality of it, but how it feels. And it was really wonderful. So it was my favorite.
Okay, Emily.
My favorite is actually when Audrey first starts realizing there's something wrong with Rhett, like when there's something off, because that is the first time, even with that initial opening scene being terrifying and gross, like that fear, that's the first time that I feel that fear build. And like that moment, I think is incredibly important to the entire series. But my favorite line is still, ma'am, this is Alaska. I love it every time.
Okay, Katie.
I also really like the bit where she goes to look at the stars, as you can probably tell, because I milked that moment for all it's worth. I talked a little bit about the idea of there being sort of primitive ancient things there, but I feel that can work for the moments of light as well. I think there are some sort of universal and ancient connectors that humans and other animals no doubt have experienced since we started being conscious, I guess, whenever that was. And one of them has got to be looking up at the night sky, and particularly in these extreme northern areas. And so I love this idea that she was looking at something that people in the past have looked at and seen and felt the same thing. And there being this kind of sense of connection between these experiences and the fact that people are saying that they understand that sense of wonder and awe and elation at that moment sort of has confirmed it for me, really. But I also like the way Chris made it decay into the immediately into the dark, scary, gruesome, decaying stuff. I enjoyed that transition too.
Okay, Lucy.
I loved Alan's performance as Everett so much. I think he was the 100% the right person for the job. He made me at least, love Everett so much, which made his death so tragic. And I feel like from the cold open, we got introduced to so many pieces of information. We had like the star scene, and we had Izzy pop in and give us some humor. So we're working with a lot. And then Everett is dead, and it kind of returns us to this very dark theme of that kind of goes throughout the whole story. So I think he just, oh my God, I loved him so much. And I knew what happened, but when he died, I was like so bummed out. I was like, maybe they changed something I didn't know. But no, he was so excellent. One of my favorite performances.
I think that we're going to wrap up today. Do you have any closing thoughts?
Thanks, everybody, for listening and supporting the show. It's wonderful, the reception that the show has gotten so far. It's great that we were able to find an audience quickly, and we're really happy for that. There will be more commentary episodes that are going to be exclusive to the Patreon. So if you want to hear those, along with, we're also working on at least one bonus episode for the show. So if you are interested in getting some of that content and supporting the show as well, you can head over to patreon.com/Hidden People Podcast, where you can support not only Uncanny Valley, but all of our shows simultaneously. And if this is the last thing that you're hearing from Uncanny Valley for a while, know that there will be a second season of the show, but also before that, there will be other opportunities to continue this story before even season 2 comes out, with connections that Uncanny Valley has with our other series. So look for information about that coming on the Uncanny Valley feed, which will tell you about those things as they release. But there's a lot more coming. We can't make these things super quickly because, like we said, we're just a few people and we're kind of like putting it together in our basement. But we're gonna get to work on those things as quickly as we possibly can to get them in your hands. I don't think we talked about this, but the show was written, a year and a half ago?
Yeah. And I am still working on the final episode right now as we speak.
Yes. Because I think we started in 22.
Yeah.
And then we recorded it at the very beginning of 23.
Yeah.
So yeah, it takes a while to build these things, but we will get back to you with more Uncanny Valley as soon as we can.
The thing that I fought tooth and nail to bring my son into is Dungeons and Dragons. That is the ultimate solution to parenthood.
I'm Alexis Ohanian. In my podcast, Business Dad, I'm hoping to open up the conversation about balancing careers and family. I talked to Rainn Wilson. I wanted to learn more about Rainn's advice to play D&D with your kids. Business Dad is available now, so be sure to listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.